Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Markwitt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we're going to take you on a little trip today.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say that we're going to be tripping. We're just going to go on a little trip. We're going to talk a little bit about some what might be considered taboo topics.
We were watching a Riff Tracks version of a movie the other night. Riff Tracks is all the guys that used to do Mystery Science Theater 3000 back in the 1990s, where they play a B movie and make fun of it as they play it. And they do that now. They'll play movies from the past, B movies or movies from the past, and they'll make fun of them now. They call them Riff Tracks now. We're watching a live recorded version of Riff Tracks making fun of the movie Reefer Madness from the 1930s. It's a really funny take on watching this movie that was created in the 1930s, which was basically a propaganda movie against the use of marijuana or cannabis. And it's looking back now, it's hilarious because it's a lot of old men shouting at a camera about the dangers and evils of marijuana, and how, you know, they're saying that if you smoke marijuana or if you use marijuana, you're going to take an axe and murder your family, or it's going to cause all these problems. And it's really funny to see. I mean, just without the Riff Tracks guys making fun of this movie, it's pretty ridiculous, some of the claims and the way the characters act as they're depicted on screen smoking marijuana cigarettes, and they act like just insane. And I think it ends up, there's a murder in the movie because the guy's strung out on marijuana. I mean, it's crazy stuff, right? And the Riff Tracks guys do a great job making fun of it.
But you know, it's not really difficult to make fun of that movie because there's so much material to work with.
Oh, yeah.
There really is. It's, like you mentioned, it's really ridiculous. And that has been the relationship that people or society, at least in this country, have had with most psychoactive drugs. Now, not all of them. Obviously, there are many psychedelics, psychotropics, and psychoactives that are regularly prescribed. A lot of antidepressant and ADHD medicine and a lot of antipsychotic drugs are psychoactive. So it's not like we have like a completely, like we don't know anything about them, or that we have them all on Schedule 1 and none of them are considered to be, you know, of any medical use. But some of the drugs that are on Schedule 1, like marijuana or cannabis, they've been the butt of a lot of massive misinformation. And you and I were both raised in very conservative households where the concept or idea of taking any drug, that was more than, I don't know, Tylenol, was considered, you just didn't do it. Like there was no way it was going to happen. And as you and I parted ways from our backgrounds and became more open to things that would help facilitate greater self-awareness and personal development, we ended up doing quite a bit of research on psychotropics and psychoactives. And so what we wanted to do today, because we feel like it's difficult to get this conversation right. I'll just say that. On one side, you've got people who are adamantly against the whole concept, especially if they have had loved ones say die of an overdose on any form of illicit drug, or if they have friends or family members that have become drug addicts. Like, it's hard to talk about this conversation or have this conversation if you have a very poignant and painful experience in your life around drugs. Like, just say the word drugs, which are usually considered illicit drugs. When we use the word drug in this country, at least, most of the time when people talk about drugs, they're talking about illicit drugs. And on the other side of the coin, you've got people who are like very loud-spoken, very for the decriminalization or even the legalization of some or all drugs. And there are lots of pieces of information on that side where like it's clear that this is a passion of theirs, making sure that, or like being a part of the decriminalization or the legalization of all drugs, regardless of whether or not they're considered illicit at this point or not. And we feel like we come somewhere in the middle, because we feel like this is not a cavalier conversation to have. Like, this is not this is not a conversation where like, yep, they should all be decriminalized and it's a done deal. I mean, we have some sympathies towards the system of looking at like, well, the war on drugs didn't work, so maybe there's other better ways of doing it. But we also recognize that drugs are like anything that can have very painful consequences if they get in the hands of somebody who doesn't know how to use them. It's like a car. Like, not just anybody can drive a car. And if just anybody gets behind the wheel of a car, they could do a lot of damage, including kill themselves and others. So we feel like this is a conversation that should be had very respectfully. And at the same time, I think you and I both feel ready to have a conversation where we maybe can shift some perspectives on this particular topic.
Yeah, and you can see that there is a consensus among most people, at least in the medical profession, that certain very intense drugs, opiates, for example, or other technologies that we've developed as humans to help us manage either disease or disorders or quality of life, we're totally okay with those. We're totally okay. In fact, the epidemic, at least here in the United States, that's happening in the last few years is an opiate epidemic. And a lot of it is due to prescription drugs on the market being sold on the black market. And people are getting addicted, and it's ruining lives and destroying communities all over rural America in particular. And I think the cities are affected too. These are not banned drugs. They are available to doctors and medical professionals to prescribe to people, and they're being abused all over the place. And I think I want to say that anytime there's substances that you take into your body that have an effect, there's a risk of abuse, and there's a risk of danger, overdosing. I mean, there's all sorts of risks depending on the type of substance you take into your body, whether it's something like tobacco, alcohol, or all the way up to an opioid that you got prescribed by your doctor. There's always risks associated with things that you take into your body that can alter your state. So I think when we talk about this, we also need to be very clear that not all drugs are created equal. There's not this it seems like there's this conversation in the United States, at least, and I think on a global scale to some degree, that there's two categories of drugs. There are legal drugs and there are illegal drugs. And they either fall in one of those two camps. And while that is one way to categorize them, you could look at, well, the effects of the drugs on a person's body or system or mind could also be a category to look at. So you have different drugs that stimulate your physical body more than your mental state. You have different psychoactive drugs that stimulate your mental state, have no physical effects at all. It's just psychoactive. And, the perception is that you're having physical effects, but it's not really. So when we talk about drugs, that's an entire broad, giant category of substance. And on this podcast, we want to bring that focus way, way in and talk about substances that can be used as tools for personal growth or behavior change. That's basically what we want to focus in on. And some of the ones that I think are extremely dangerous, I'd like to mention as well in this podcast too. Because I think when you open yourself up to tools that can alter your mind or your body, you have to be careful. A lot of times the permission one might give themselves to go down the road of exploring something that can help them as a technology for personal growth, that same permission now could go, well, let me try this other thing over here. And that could be very, very, very dangerous. So I think that's just one thing I'd like to mention to people that are listening to us, because I think we have some influence in how people think. And I want to be very careful to say, I am in no way condoning abuse of any substance for your body or your mind. In fact, if you see yourself or find yourself in an abused situation, seek help for that. You need professional medical help to get yourself off of that kind of stuff, because that could really ruin your life or somebody's life that you know and you love. Yeah,
well, and that's, to just kind of give a plug for one thing that I believe might be considered political. I personally feel that drug addiction is not criminal, it's medical, very specifically. Yeah. And I don't think that we should fight drug abuse with, criminal procedures. I think we should guide anybody who's in that situation by treating it medically.
Now, the drug trade, there could possibly be an argument for cartels and things of this nature being a danger because people are getting killed and there's a lot of money involved. But you're talking about the actual user of a certain substance or drug shouldn't be a criminal because they have access to that or have used it.
Yeah.
It should probably be treated as a medical situation.
Yeah, that's my personal opinion. I
would agree with you.
I think if we treated it medically, I think that we would see a much bigger turnaround in drug abuse. Like, we would actually maybe possibly solve some of the challenges. So that's my personal opinion. But as far as what we're talking about today, there's really just a handful of primarily psychotropics that we feel have very interesting results. Now, also for sake of clarity, we also want to mention this concept of set and setting, which I think is extremely important. Your set and setting, this was something that came up with, or at least was popularized by Timothy Leary, who was a massive proponent of LSD. And he mentioned that you have to have the right set and setting, or it's basically almost a useless experience. Your set is your mindset, or how you're going into it. What your mindset is, what your purpose or intention of the experience is. And then your setting is your environment, the people around you, the context around you. And his strong recommendation is that if you don't have the right set and setting, you just avoid it altogether. But if you have the right set and setting, it can be very powerful. And I once had a friend say to me that what you can do with LSD, you can also do with meditation. If you do meditation for long enough, it will get you to the same mental space. He said, but the difference is that you can walk across the United States or you can fly in a jet plane. And it's not that LSD will necessarily do something that you cannot also do in just through skill development with meditation. It's just, it takes you a lot longer to get there with meditation. And so I think LSD gets a really bad rap. I think a lot of, it is entirely possible that truly terrible experiences have happened for people on LSD. I think that's most likely the case because it is a technology that must be used with a delicate hand and with a lot of intention. I personally don't feel like it's a party drug. I don't understand why somebody would use it at a party situation.
That seems insane to me.
Yeah, I mean, if a person is making those kinds of choices and it's a totally great experience for them, I'm certainly not going to judge it. And at the same time, I also, as far as I'm concerned, it's specifically a personal development tool. And the experience on LSD it's very different than I was anticipating. Now, I'm saying this from the first person perspective because I've done LSD. I've only done it the once, and it was many years ago. But the experience was, I kind of expected it to be one of those like cartoonish experiences that you see popularized in like media, like in sitcoms or movies or whatever, where somebody takes LSD and then all of a sudden like everything is just wackadoodle. There was definitely a component, especially as the situation was peaking, where things got very surreal. And one of the reasons why is because apparently it's removing all of your filters, like the filters that we talk a lot about that define your worldview, in particular your sensory filters, the ones that help stabilize the world for you, in particular sight. We have all these filtration processes that our eyes and brain use in conjunction with each other to make it so that we're not terrified of all the things that we see around each other if what our actual senses are pulling in are like oddities to us. Our brain starts to take over and makes it so that, I talk about this concept of saccadic masking, which is effectively blindness that we have for 90 minutes to 2 hours every day that we're not even aware of because our brain just covers that. Saccadic masking is the phenomenon you experience when you're looking at yourself in a mirror and you look from one eye to the next. Your brain doesn't really register the experience of the shift. It just goes from one eye to the next. You don't really see anything in between. And you are effectively blind for that couple milliseconds or whatever it is because your brain it's just not going to register that. That's too disorienting. And our brain actually does that to us a lot.
And we also know there's a big dark spot or blind spot in our eyes. Our brain fills in the gap there. and you basically are blind in a part of your eye, you have no idea you're blind there because your brain just fills all the gaps in for you.
Yeah, like a Photoshop blur tool or something. And so what happens with LSD is that it like kind of removes those filters. So the phenomenon that you see, that may actually just be what you would have been seeing anyway had your brain not said that was not what it was picking up. Like had your brain not taken over and gone, we're not going to see that thing so destabilized. We're just going to pretend like it's set. A lot of that stuff just gets thrown out. So the visuals you're experiencing, the things that a lot of people feel are disorienting are just, I mean, yeah, they're disorienting because your brain doesn't allow us to see those things normally. It just kind of stabilizes all of that for us. So there is a component of that. And there's also a component of being taken to other places to some extent. That sounds really vague and maybe even a little threatening, but it was more just like, for me, getting super in touch with a lot of concepts that I hadn't really been able to access before. And I think that's why the word trip is so, I feel like it's so appropriate. The word trip indicates that you're going someplace. And one of the major advantages to having a situation like this is that you can bring back souvenirs. And the souvenirs that I brought back from that specific, situation, that experience, there were many souvenirs I brought back. So many different things. I felt like this incredible connection to the matrix of femininity that I had never experienced before. I think it really pushed my accepting of my own feminine nature way further than I would have expected. And it also helped me heal my relationship with my mother, even though my mom and I have been, we've been, based on her choice, we have not really talked for many years. And it gave me an opportunity to heal that relationship without her having to be there. There were just a lot of really positive things that came from it for me. But I also made sure with these, with some guiding assistance to make sure my set and setting was right.
Yeah, this was guided. This wasn't just willy-nilly. We spent 2 weeks detoxing from impure foods and things with intention setting. We spent three days beforehand going to an art gallery, a lot of journal and reflection, and then the experience happens, and then you have a day of debriefing. It's not like it's just something you just decide to do one day. You have to put a lot of, at least I like to approach things like this with a lot of intention because I want to use it as a mental personal development technology, not to have fun with it.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing that we really want to highlight here is that if these were to be decriminalized or if they were to be made legal, our strong recommendation would be to always see them as something to be not to be cavalier about, something to be very respectful of. The experiences, they could potentially be quite difficult for people. And so it would be a matter of, really seeing this as an experience that you can't take lightly. In fact, for 3 to 6 months beforehand, if I'm not mistaken, I went on a cleanse of content because I have a tendency to really enjoy like fairly violent video games and, TV shows around like Criminal Minds where they talk about serial killers a lot. And I just went on a complete detox of all of that for a very long time. And I did that intentionally because I wanted to make sure that my trip was as good as possible. So I spent 3 to 6 months preparing for it actually. And I feel like one of the reasons why too, I want to share my experience is because they've also done a lot of studies around how LSD can be very helpful to people who are dealing with things like PTSD. And my feeling, and I want to add my voice personally to the chorus of people who are saying this, even if it doesn't become decriminalized or even become legal, I feel like it's irresponsible to not at least use it in medical
or research.
Yeah, in
medical research, universities, hospitals, things of this nature.
Exactly. Thank you. I was looking for the word medical research and I was not finding it.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think I want to add my voice to the chorus that I'm okay with it not being decriminalized or not being made legal, but I really feel like because I know so many positive things can come from it in the right context, that I think it should be incorporated in medical research. And I think I think it is slowly, and there are some that have been given that green light, but I think that not to the level that it could really be helping people.
As a parent, I sit here and I hear you say that, and you listening, if you're a parent or somebody that, you've got people in your life, like Antonia mentioned very early on, somebody that maybe had drug addiction or a death come from something like this, what she's saying might be frightening. I could totally perspective shift and say, man, I don't want my kids to get a hold of something that could really change their, alter something to where they get hurt or something goes wrong. Maybe they have a bad experience. Like, that makes me concerned for them. At the same time, I grew up my whole life. I had no experience with substance at all my entire life until, I guess, my late 20s. And I mean, when I say no experience with substance, I'm talking about alcohol, cigarettes, nothing, no experience at all with any substance, period. To the point where, like, when I went into a liquor store, I didn't know the difference between the brand names and the type of alcohol. That's how ignorant I was around any particular alcohol or anything like this. And so when I began to experiment with things in my late 20s, this is not as a teen rebellion. I made a conscious choice to drink alcohol for the first time. I remember having the thought, man, I've been lied to my whole life about what this effect is. Like, I see media paint alcohol as an extreme thing, where people get drunk and blackout drunk and do stupid stuff, like the movie, what's it called, The Hangover in Las Vegas. I mean, now they were roofied. They had different drugs in their system. But still, that was kind of the impression. Like, if you drink alcohol, you're going to end up in a gutter somewhere, totally strung out. This is the perception I had growing up around this. And as I began to consciously indulge using certain substances for personal growth, when I shifted, I realized I'd been lied to about all of these things. None of the experiences that I was having were what I was told I was going to have. And that's not just from a conservative, religious, or Christian background. That's even from a Hollywood or media background. I'm still baffled today at how the media or Hollywood portrays, for example, being high on marijuana or cannabis in such extreme, out of your mind, out of your body experiences where they're seeing shapes and colors and their minds are just gone. I mean, I'm talking about movies that have been made in the last few years. And I'm looking at these movies going, that's nothing like the experience. Why are they portraying it like this in the media to people? And I wonder if it's almost like there's a tongue-in-cheek, like, we all know that this isn't the experience, but Hollywood likes to be caricatured around things, so they like to play to what people's perceptions are of stuff. But I think it does a disservice, because there are substances that people are extremely fearful of, and I don't think you should be disrespectful of them. I think you should have respect for any extreme substance, and that includes cannabis. I think you should have respect for it, but I don't believe you should fear something that is a natural organic plant, for example, that grows out of the ground. And that would include psilocybin mushrooms that also grow out of the ground, that different cultures for history, like millennia, have been using, I don't know about millennia, maybe at least thousands of years, have been using to alter state, to access parts of their mind, parts of the experience. And again, nothing like you've been told. If you ever have an experience with psilocybin mushrooms, it is usually an extreme experience, but it's nothing like you're told it is from media or maybe a conservative background. And I think I almost get upset for people, because what ends up happening now is you paint this picture of this extreme, and then when someone gets access to something, and maybe they do at the age of 18 or 19, smoke a joint or have a hit of cannabis or some other substance, and they go, oh, the media and my parents lied to me. This isn't as bad as I thought. Now they may try a dangerous drug like cocaine or meth or heroin because they realize these lower drugs. So the argument of drugs, being gateway drugs, the reason they're gateway drugs is because of you people telling people that these are so extreme, and they're like, this is nothing like I've been told. I bet these other harder drugs like heroin and cocaine aren't as bad either. And now you've got a kid that's addicted to something and can't get off of it. And it kind of makes me angry thinking about that, because the truth is not out there. These substances are not what you think they are. Now, they are extreme, and they should be respected and approached in a very responsible, mature, adult way. No child should be having access to any of this kind of stuff at all, period. 21 or older. In fact, I would posit that 25 or older, because the brain doesn't stop forming until you're about 25 years old. So I could even say if some of these, certain substances were legalized or at least decriminalized, I could totally see over 25 being the age, as the appropriate age.
Yeah. Millennia and thousands of years is the same thing. So it's okay.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. But sorry, my tea, I just had to get in
No,
there.
you're absolutely right. I'm thinking millennia is like millions of years,
Yeah.
and it's not. You're absolutely right. It's thousands of years. I was on such a roll.
You
I'm
were.
like,
It was beautiful. It was a very passionate speech, but my tea, I was like, it's the same. It's okay. You can say that. So just going back to LSD, the one thing I wanted to make a comment of is that LSD in the United States is considered Schedule 1. And Schedule 1 means that it's of no value, including in medical research. And if I were to say anything that is a plug, I feel like that should be reassessed. It should be reassessed whether or not it has research value. Now, like you mentioned, one of the challenges here is that it's so difficult to get accurate information on how these things, go down. And by the way, we're probably going to get it from both sides. Like as we're talking, I'm like, we're probably going to upset people who feel like all drugs are bad, and we're going to upset people who feel like all drugs are okay because we just said that cocaine and heroin are not okay. Now, I did heroin in a
You did heroin?
I did. Well, I had when I was in the hospital.
I think that was like what's it called?
It was an opiate, but it was like it was like
it's not
very
heroin,
similar to heroin.
It's morphine, is what they gave you when you were
no,
in pain.
they gave me the thing up. It wasn't morphine because they gave me morphine and it wasn't enough.
There was a synthetic something they gave you. I don't know if it was heroin though.
Well, it was basically they said it was heroin. They were like, what we're giving you is essentially the medical equivalent to heroin. So when I say I did heroin, I actually was like, it was medically given to me.
You're not like strung out in an alley with a needle in your arm. This is in a hospital you're talking about.
And when I was in that much extraordinary pain, that was a delightful experience because I was in the worst pain of my life, and that was the one thing that made me feel better. So obviously, I don't think like all opiates are inappropriate in all situations. I mean, that was a moment when I was very glad of its existence. And cocaine, like I don't really have I mean I have some opinions on cocaine. Like Robert Anton Wilson one time said, and he was a major proponent of LSD and marijuana before he died, and he's like, oh, you want to know what it's like to be on cocaine? He's like, sniff some baby powder and then run around your house and burn all the money you can find. Which I thought was interesting. So it's like, I mean, I don't really have a strong opinion on cocaine because I've never really done it. So but like for the people who think all drugs are okay, we're gonna piss those people off, and for the people who think that none of the drugs are okay, we're gonna piss those people off too. But I feel like you and I we've been talking about doing this podcast for a while. And we've been a little cautious about, a little concerned rather. We've been a little concerned about doing this podcast because we know that it's gonna shake up some tail feathers a little bit.
Yeah, most people can have a mature conversation around this. There's so much stigma around it, so much fear, misinformation, illegality. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a fear for people.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a tough conversation to have without triggering a lot of people to feel, with the potential to trigger people to feel like they've got to defend something that they stand so strongly for. Or against or whatever.
Yeah, and I feel like what you just said is kind of the purpose. I wasn't sure 100% why I wanted to do this podcast so bad, because I'm actually the person who's been pitching pretty hard for it. And I couldn't figure out why it was that I wanted to, like I felt so strongly about it. And you just said it. It's that when we stigmatize and give propaganda around these ideas, if somebody actually does break out of the mentality that it's like they absolutely can't do any of this and they go try it or whatever they try. Usually it's marijuana first because it's so easy to get your hands on marijuana. And, it's like something that's very common for high school kids to do and college kids to do. And they do it and it's not it's not as it's been sold, right? Like it's not the way that people, I remember watching the first time like Homer Simpson took medical marijuana on The Simpsons, and it was like he was on an LSD trip. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure that's not what his experience would be. But they were doing it for the lulz, and at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but you're now once again creating this false impression of what it's like. And I was when it comes to marijuana, I don't think everybody should do marijuana. I don't think it should not be used cautiously either, or
children shouldn't be using it. Absolutely
not. And I'm with you on the 25-year-old thing. Now, of course, anybody who's under 25 who uses marijuana and listens to the podcast will probably take objection to that too, and that's fine. But that's my personal opinion, and that's probably because I did not do marijuana until I was well over 25. I was late 20s or early 30s. And so At that time, though, what I realized is that there are gifts that can be given to you if you use these substances respectfully and in these good and in the right set and setting. And one of the most powerful, I mean, there's like a handful of extremely powerful psychotropics that I took all approximately around the same time, probably within that a 2-year period where I was using these specifically for personal development work and ego transcendence work. Because I had been told, well, do you want to do 20 years of meditation or would you like to do one of these? Like, and in a really good setting. And I was like, well, I'm an ENTP. Let's go try it out. Let's see what happens.
And to piggyback off the last podcast, you had just bumped up into grave 6 green.
I did.
And so you're way more open to various forms of seeing reality in the world, and you're kind of floating through this, hey, I'm open kind of experience.
Yeah, I was a brand new baby grave 6 green.
And that happened to me too. It's like that really does open yourself up to a lot of things you never were open to before.
Absolutely. And so one of the other things I took was MDMA. Now, MDMA is the chemical that's found in ecstasy. Ecstasy is a little different than MDMA. MDMA is the pure form of it, and while most people say it's the same thing as ecstasy, as far as I can tell, they're actually different because ecstasy pills will oftentimes have other ingredients in them. Like sometimes they can have meth, and sometimes they can have caffeine. But MDMA is the pure form. And what MDMA does is it basically dumps all the serotonin and dopamine into your system at the same time. And I have never felt more compassion for the human race than I did when I was on my meditation retreat with MDMA. Now, I say a meditation retreat because, once again, I treated it very respectfully. I wanted to make sure I was in the right set and setting. I was using it specifically for personal development purposes. And it gave me a feeling of love that I have never experienced before. And I was able to take that home with me. That was a souvenir I got to take back because now I have the ability to some extent replicate that same experience. I can feel a profound love for the human race based on my having experienced it once on that trip. Another situation was when I took psilocybin. Psilocybin is a mushroom. It's a very organic experience. Sometimes it can make your tummy hurt a little bit. And psilocybin was like, if LSD is very like digital, psilocybin is very organic.
Yeah.
And when I took psilocybin, once again, meditation retreats, very much intention sets, very much for personal development. One of the things that I was able to bring home with me was the experience of how much everything around me is just pure energy. Like we're just concentrated balls of energy that are telling stories about everything that we do. And it was like maybe a couple days after I had gone on that meditation retreat and taken psilocybin that I was doing laundry. And as I was pulling laundry out of the whole situation, though, was me taking laundry downstairs in a laundry basket, feeding it into the washer, then putting it in the dryer, then folding it, and then taking it back upstairs. And this moment of just like absurdity struck me, that these were just little balls of energy. Like they were like these clothes were effectively concentrated balls of energy because they're all made up of atoms, just like everything is. And I had the story or narrative in my head that I needed to take these concentrated balls of energy and then walk them, myself a concentrated ball of energy, walk them downstairs, mess about with them, and then
mix them with other energy forces.
And then walk these concentrated balls of energy back up the steps. And this was the story that I was doing laundry. And there was just this moment of like absurdity about what was happening. And I think that was the first time I really understood what a narrative was.
Yeah.
Like on a profound level, I was like, oh, this is what narratives are. Narratives are the stories we tell ourselves about our everyday activities.
Yeah.
And so they don't just have to be these elaborate narratives about like ideologies or belief systems or whatever. A narrative could just simply be the story we tell ourselves about what that concentrated ball of energy is. And what was so fascinating about that situation is that from that point on, I stopped taking everything so seriously.
Yeah.
I think it was a moment of transcending the attachment that I had to the mundane and getting really frustrated or upset or like feeling like I had to blitz through everything or whatever. It was like, oh, I can kind of see the subjective nature of all of this now, and I think it's going to be okay.
Yeah, I would say that my experiences with LSD, which I've done a little bit more than you because, well, I won't go into the reasons, but anyway, I also went on meditation retreats, and I think that the thing that came out of those experiences was this very notion that you're talking about. For some reason, you lose a sense of all the stories and the narratives you're telling, and what you really truly understand is what it's really hard to describe because it's very experiential, but you definitely get a sense of your life and all the things that are happening on a DNA level. That sounds super weird, right? But basically what it is like, you kind of understand that everything you're doing in life, your very physicality, all of this is a carrier for the cargo of DNA. Like basically you're a vessel that continues this genetic script or code from the generation that gave it to you to the generation that's going to come after you. And that's what's actually really happening. Underneath it all, that's actually the fundamental thing. And even that's a narrative because I'm having to speak it out loud. So it's even more experiential than what I'm saying right now. And I had this profound shift in consciousness during the experience to say, wow, everything that I think and do is just me creating a story or narrative around it, that this is what has to be done or what is going to be done. Like all of it is just a function of me staying alive long enough for this DNA cargo to be passed from the people who gave it to me, my parents, to the people who are going to take it from me, my children. That's really it at the end of the day. And that sounds super defeatist maybe to you if you're listening, you haven't had an experience, or like, really, that's all life is to you? And that's not all life is to me. Obviously, I've got joy and fun and happiness. I'm building a business. I'm talking on a podcast. I'm doing other things. But it's this sober-minded experience you have where you just start to realize that all the stuff you're worrying about, all the things that you're fretting about, all the narratives and all the stories you're telling yourself, this is super important, this thing it has to happen, or the world's going to end, or my life's going to end. It kind of just falls by the wayside during some of these extreme experiences. And again, if you ever want to experiment with something like this, please be ensuring that you've got the correct set and setting and that you treat it with intention, because, you were doing a lot of talking, so I didn't get to interject this, but I would definitely caution against any kind of substance that could create a physical chemical dependency on your body. I think alcohol is an extremely dangerous drug. People can get addicted to it. It's very dangerous. Tobacco can be very addictive. Cocaine, meth, heroin, all of these kind of substances can be extremely physically addictive. And I think that you have to be very cautious. And even the substance that you're talking about, Antonia, MDMA, I would caution people, because when that drug dumps the serotonin and dopamines into your system, you have a limited amount of times you can do that before you burn out the receptors in your brain. And I don't know exactly the numbers of how long that can go, but that is a drug that does deplete the reserves of the serotonin and dopamines. Now, if you do it a dozen times in your lifetime, you're probably going to be okay. But if you do it, I've talked to people who have done it every weekend to go to a rave or a club or a party, and for years, once a week for years, and there's something missing with them. They've burned something out there. So I guess I just want to be cautious that certain substances can be highly chemically addictive to your physical body, and also can deplete some of the things in your mind. Some of the psychoactives we're talking about, there's been no, as far as I can tell, studies or links to any physical. LSD, Psilocybin, Cannabis have not been linked to any like addiction challenges. Now, you might be emotionally addicted to some of these, but as far as physical dependencies, chemical dependencies, they're safe in the regard that you're not going to get physically addicted. Now, you can have a profound shift where you don't come out the same on the other end, and that's possible because your mind goes through an experience. You see the world very different. So I just want to caution, but I think there's value in it, and it's such a profound experience if you ever get the chance to use these as mental technologies. We're not advocating for it, but we do want to open up a conversation about it because we feel like no one feels free to talk about this often. It's like, I was around some family members, man, this is like a couple years ago. We live in an agricultural area here in rural Pennsylvania. And, the economy here was drying up. And I said, we're in an agriculture area. Do you know what would really help this area? I mean, it's been helping Colorado and Washington State. If cannabis was legalized, all these farmers that are starting to go out of business could get a new cash crop and make money again, right? And some of my cousins and relatives looked at me like I was speaking like crazy, crickets, and they got so awkward and weird and they want to change the subject. I'm like, why can't we talk about this at least? I understand that you may not agree with it, but me mentioning it, it's as if I just killed a baby in front of you and I'm playing in its blood. Why in the world are we so shy and so weird about talking about these kind of topics? That's the kind of thing that makes me crazy. I don't care if you want to indulge in this stuff or not. We should at least be able to talk openly about it. So I think that's really what we hope to do here in this podcast, give you a sense of permission to at least talk about the topic. Whether or not you want to go and do something, I think you can at least get information.
Well, and we do acknowledge that it is, at least in the country that we're talking about this, it is illegal.
Yeah.
So we're not promoting you to go do the thing that's illegal. We would love at some point in the future for it to not be illegal to do some of these things.
Sure.
Or at least open it up to medical research, regardless of whether or not it ever gets legalized for just basic recreational use. A lot of these, at least get them off of Schedule 1. Like MDMA is Schedule 1, LSD is Schedule 1, cannabis is Schedule 1 according to the to the Fed. So maybe just open up dialogue, having somebody like us go, you know what, we took the risk of doing it. We did it acknowledging that at the time we did it, it was illegal. And we had very different experiences than we were told that we would have. And so let's open a dialogue, shall we? And you said, it's a very profound experience. And then you said, but we're not advocating for it. But that is accurate. It's a profound experience that was different than we expected. So we're not advocating to take it. We're advocating to talk about it.
Yeah. And I am advocating profound experiences. I'm just not advocating any substance use directly. If you want to have a profound experience, I think you should find the method to that profound experience, whatever that is for you. And you can decode what I'm talking about here. But I'm not telling you to go do any particular substance to get to that profound experience. It could be meditation.
Exactly.
We talked to a friend recently who does a Lakota sweat lodge experience where there's no psychoactive or any kind of substance at all. It's just done in a teepee with drumming and heat. And there's an intense experience because of breath work and heat and the drumming that you have. And that's a peak experience someone can have. And it shifts you into altered states of consciousness to access parts of your mind and your awareness. That has nothing to do with doing any kind of substance. So I would encourage you to pursue peak, interesting life and perceptive shifting experiences, not particularly through any type of substance, but those could possibly be part of your journey as well.
And there are ways to have some of these peak experiences that have nothing to do with, like you mentioned, taking an illegal substance. Like ayahuasca, if I'm not mistaken, which ayahuasca's agent or chemical or like the part of it that is active and creates a psychoactive or psychotropic experience is DMT. Dimethyltryptophan, I think that's what it is, or something similar to that. So ayahuasca, if I'm not mistaken, there are parts of the country where people use it religiously, and it's not illegal if it's used in a religious way. But DMT, the active ingredient in a concentrated form, is also Schedule 1. And interestingly enough, during that time period, many, many years ago, I did a DMT trip as well. DMT was very, very different than anything I had ever experienced. In fact, I would say it was the most powerful of all the psychedelics I took. And it was also the shortest. It's like a 15-minute situation. I think I'm not sure if it's still on Netflix, but it used to be on Netflix. There was a documentary called...
it's the God particle?
No, the spirit molecule?
Molecule.
The spirit molecule, I believe. Can you look it up for me just to make sure that that's accurate? It's a very interesting experience where, and at this point
that's correct.
I had taken a spirit molecule. I had taken a couple different psychotropics at that point, or psychoactives. And I wasn't a beginner. And yet the experience I had on DMT took me to what I would say was the other side of the universe. Like every other psychoactive I had ever taken kept me here on the planet. I just had different experiences and I was in an altered state. DMT felt like I was literally on the other side of the universe. And there's something called machine gnomes that are very common when you take DMT, I guess. I've heard that I'm not the only person who's ever experienced what's called machine gnomes. And they're effectively these sort of representatives that have faces and can engage and interact with you. And it was a moment where as an agnostic that doesn't really have any strong belief either way, it was a moment where I thought that maybe there might be something more out there. It was like the first time. Well, apparently DMT is found in everything. It's not just found in plants, it's also found in your body. And right before you die, your body, your brain, if it's like a major situation, like I think it happens before you die naturally, and also like if you have a near-death experience, your brain will prepare you for the death by dumping DMT into your system. So a lot of the near-death experiences where somebody sees the lights or has an experience with God is frequently considered to be a DMT trip. Now, one of the things that's kind of sad to me is that at the end of our lives, we oftentimes die in hospitals and we die anesthetized. So we don't really get that DMT trip, which I think is a gift from nature to be able to have that experience right before you die. So I've kind of considered that because I've had that experience now. I'm like, I think I want to do that at the end of my life too, if possible. But when people have car accidents where they're pretty sure they're going to die, oftentimes they'll have DMT trips. And it's a very unique and interesting and very, I would just say it's an extremely uniquely spiritual experience. And if you want to know more about DMT, check out that Netflix documentary, The Spirit Molecule. But DMT is also Schedule 1, which is interesting. And obviously it has some medical use because our body dumps it into our system right before we die. So obviously nature thinks it has some sort of medical use. So I think opening up this conversation to again indicate that maybe even if it doesn't go legal, even if it doesn't get decriminalized, even if it's never for recreational use, maybe we should reevaluate whether or not these things have some medical merit, which I believe all of the drugs that we've mentioned so far do.
And it's refreshing to be able to talk openly about things, whether they're legal or not, whether you agree with them or not. I mean, I think that is the core of what I would like you to take away from this as you're listening, is be open to talk about things. Just there's no reason to be shameful or weird about stuff anymore. Like, why are we doing that as humans? That's like a broader principle. And I'm trying to bring that into my own life, is even things that seem taboo to talk about, as long as we're doing it respectfully and we're not demonizing any person or hurting somebody in the conversation, I don't see why all topics can't be on the table, at least in a conversation. So I guess, proceed with caution. If you are interested in what we're talking about and you ever want to engage with some of this, my recommendation is you maybe find someone who's had some experience that can help guide you, if that's what you want to do. In no way am I advocating or instructing you or telling you to do anything that is illegal or that would get you hurt or harmed. Please, please make adult, wise, mature decisions for yourself in whatever substance, from alcohol to something very difficult and intense. Please make good decisions for yourself. Don't just treat this cavalierly. But also, you might want to think about different technologies. And I think another technology that everybody has access to that isn't substance focused is meditation. I think there's a lot of ways through meditation and meditative practices, through using your breath work, how you sit and stand and breathe and move. There's all sorts of ways that you can shift your consciousness to see new perspectives, to gain insight into your life and into the lives of people around you, into what's happening in the world. So it doesn't matter what method you get there. The point is, open yourself up to conversation and open yourself up to the possibility of seeing things from different perspectives than you're normally used to seeing them. So I think that's the serious-minded stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
For our little trip show.
Yeah. Well, and I would say that you and I are both not just medical, but also recreational use cannabis advocates.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's no reason why that can't be legalized for mature adults.
Absolutely. And so like that's definitely something that, I mean, on like to make a political statement, I'm definitely for that. I think I've mentioned that multiple times on the podcast that I'm definitely for the recreational use of cannabis being, I mean, just at least get it off the Schedule 1, which is ridiculous.
It's legal in North Korea. So
yeah.
There you go. What does that tell you?
Well, and it's what's interesting about marijuana or cannabis is that as personally, I feel like a lot of ego transcendence work that I've done has been facilitated through, some of the psychotropics we've mentioned already, but I don't see those as being a daily situation. I see that as being very isolated. I mean, when I talk about having done these, I'm not talking about having done them a lot. I'm talking about having basically done most of them 1, possibly 2 times at the most. And again, this was quite a long time ago. This was many years ago. But the things that I've tried to access, like when I take those, like I call them souvenirs, understandings, awareness, ego transcendence work, all the things that I was able to access in those altered states, they were able to be called up much easier later just through the use of cannabis. And so I didn't have to go back and use what are like the super, what are considered very taboo and dangerous drugs. I don't think they're dangerous. I mean, I think there can be danger, but I don't think there's intrinsic danger there.
It's dangerous like a car or an airplane is dangerous.
Exactly. So being able to recall them, though, and to be able to really have those souvenirs be impactful and effective in my life, it was very easy to do so simply by using cannabis. And so I think a lot of those same gifts can be brought on by cannabis, and yet cannabis, like I think of all of these, there are some emotional and mentally addictive addictive properties to them. Like you said, there's a difference between like addiction and dependence. I don't think there's any physically dependent things that come from these. You don't get, like, your body does not become dependent upon it like it can with alcohol or other drugs, the drugs that we've mentioned, the psychedelics that we've mentioned, but you can get emotionally and psychologically addicted. And I think the same thing can happen with marijuana. I don't think it's nearly as dangerous as people say, but I do think that there is, of course, some use for caution, just like you mentioned, like there's some use for caution in alcohol. Like, I mean, I've had too much to drink and then suffered the consequences the next day. And as soon as I do that, I'm like, oh yeah, maybe I should do that. But so like these are all things that we like there's substances we're taking into our body. So we shouldn't act as if it's no big deal, which I think that we've reiterated about 40 times so far on the podcast, just to make sure that we like very much highlight that piece. But I also think that people's fear around cannabis is massively heightened, and I think it's inappropriate, honestly. But I think having access to cannabis will give you a taste of a lot of this, and so you don't have to go do those stronger psychotropics. I think meditation and just basic cannabis use, maybe not even regular cannabis use, maybe just like once or twice, can sometimes get you enough in a state where you can really understand components around your ego and get some distance from your ego and watch your ego work and recognize that you can control a lot of these things that you didn't think were controllable before. So I do think that that's something that is an interesting conversation as well.
And you've probably done some type of psychotropic. If you've ever taken Benadryl or Ritalin or even some Tylenol have codeine in them. And these are all these are altering your mental state.
They're psychoactives, yeah.
Yeah, they're psychoactives. So it's a little bit demystification of it, but not avocation of it necessarily directly to you unless it makes sense for you.
Right.
So what do you think? Man, this was a trip for sure on a show. I'd love to hear from you though. I mean, you've been listening, you've been with us. Are you angry? Are you excited we're talking about this? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have some thoughts? Do you have questions, more feedback? We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your voice over at personalityhacker.com. Directly below the show, you can leave your feedback in the comments section. Or you can join our community of like minds, people just like you who want to do big things in the world, grow themselves, experiment, do things differently than the status quo over at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK.
If, God forbid, you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you would leave us a rating and review, please do so. It helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Markwitt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.